The Arianne II Sample Chapter, released to the public by George R. R. Martin on May 10, 2016, is the second Winds of Winter sample chapter to follow the exploits of our favorite Dornish heroine, Arianne Martell. How does this chapter hold up when compared to the other Winds of Winter sample chapters? Well, my name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for answering just that. Spoilers ahoy! Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy. So similar to a lot of the other sample chapters we've previously covered within this Winds of Winter review series, this Arianne II chapter was originally meant to be included in the finalized version of A Dance with Dragons. However, due to George tinkering with the book's timeline, he ultimately decided that the chronology of the Arianne Martell chapters made more sense if included within the pages of the Winds of Winter, as opposed to those of A Dance with Dragons. And I gotta say, although I do understand George's reasoning here, I don't fully agree with him that these chapters couldn't have been included in Dance with Dragons, especially considering that chronologically, the Arianne II and Arianne I sample chapters appear to take place prior to the events of Quentyn's death at the end of A Dance with Dragons. This is less a knock on Arianne's story and more of a broader critique of the structural issues in the later A Song of Ice and Fire books, but over the last 2 decades, George's writing, particularly in A Dance with Dragons, has become increasingly unwieldy. He seems to be more concerned with expanding the lore and scope of Planetos, the universe within which the story takes place in, through new characters and plot lines, rather than on progressing the ones he already has. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a lot of George R. R. Martin's world building, but in A Dance with Dragons, a lot of his world building does start to choke some of the story's momentum just a bit, to the point that rather than moving existing arcs forward, George oftentimes decides instead to give us deep dives into sellsword companies, Myronese politics, and even Volantene fashion. So much so that this detour-heavy writing style has postponed and delayed a lot of key developments that George initially planned to include in the early to middle portions of A Dance with Dragons to the later portions of A Dance with Dragons. One such incident includes young Griff's arrival into Westeros, as his arrival onto Myronese shores would spur Dorne Martell's inciting response of having Arianne trek north into the Stormlands in order to meet young Griff. But because young Griff / potentially Aegon Targaryen VI's arrival doesn't happen until much later in A Dance with Dragons, Arianne's story got inevitably pushed back into the Winds of Winter when it could have very easily fit within Dance had George's narrative within that book been tighter and more focused. But okay, Arianne's story is now in the Winds of Winter, and there's nothing anyone can do about that now. So, what exactly is Arianne II about? Well, picking up from where we left off in her previous sample chapter, Arianne Martell continues to travel with Daemon Sand, Elias Sand, and a small caravan of Dornish guardsmen as they secretly make their way through the marshes of the Stormlands en route to Griffin's Roost. Word having reached Dorne Martell, Arianne's father and Prince of Dorne, of the arrival of an alleged still-alive son of Rhaegar Targaryen, he has sent forth Arianne and her party to find this so-called dragon prince and potentially form an alliance with him if they deem him worthy. But along the way, Arianne can't help but ask herself, why are they just now finding out about the existence of this young Targaryen who was once thought dead? Why is he traveling with the Golden Company? And more importantly, where are his dragons? But before Arianne can get any answers to those questions, she and her crew make contact with Lysaona Mar, a high-ranking official within the Golden Company, who then escorts them to Griffin's Roost to meet up with our old familiar Haldon Halfmeister. Haldon, having traveled with young Griff and Jon Connington during the events of A Dance with Dragons, communicates to Arianne that they just missed out on Jon Connington and young Aegon. But not to worry, for on the morrow, Haldon will put Arianne on the first ship available so that she can go and meet them. Arianne asks, well, where is that? And Haldon laughs in response and says, oh, has no one told you? Storm's End, of course. Aegon smashed the castle's defenses, and it is now ours. Much to the surprise of Arianne and Daemon. However, despite the Golden Company having taken this near impregnable castle, Daemon still mistrusts this whole cause. He tells Arianne that although Connington and Aegon seem to be doing pretty well for now, there's a Tyrell fleet that's well on its way to try to meet them in battle at Storm's End. More importantly, Aegon has no dragons, and that's the whole reason Doran sent out Arianne and their entire crew in order to meet up with the Golden Company. Without these dragons, there's really nothing for Arianne and Doran Martell at Storm's End. But Arianne remains undeterred. Maybe there aren't any dragons for them at Storm's End, but there's something about this young Aegon that piques Arianne's interest. So she agrees to ship off on the morrow, and that's pretty much it. The chapter ends there. Kind of a bit of blue balls there, as despite the passage of 2 chapters, Arianne still has yet to meet young Griff. But I suppose that's what these sample chapters are for. They're more meant to tantalize us for what's to come as opposed to giving us what we want. Now I'll be honest guys, when I first read these Arianne chapters a few years ago, I was a bit disappointed by them. Once again, it felt like George R. R. Martin was more interested in world building rather than on moving the story forward. I mean, we do get some nice lore about how weather systems work, a random cave scene with some vague hints about the Children of the Forest, and a few nice lore drops about the first Blackfire Rebellion, but we don't get an actual meeting with Aegon. I couldn't help but feel frustrated on a first read, and immediately I wrote these samplers off as nothing happening chapters. But on a reread, I've come to realize that there's a lot more beneath the surface than what I first remembered. No, Arianne still doesn't reach the narrative goalposts in the story I was hoping for, but her conversations with Lysono Mar along the way reveal a lot about George R. R. Martin's recurring motifs, and they're really fascinating to delve into. One such motif is that, while the Westerosi public may care about bloodlines, lineages, or last names on paper, it's really the person who wields the biggest military might that wins wars. And there's no more surefire display of that might than having dragons on your side. And dragons? How many dragons do you have? 1. By which you mean the boy. Prince Aegon is a man grown, princess. Can he fly? Breathe fire? The Lyseni laughed, but his lilac eyes stayed cold. Do you play kivas, my lord? Asked Arianne. My father has been teaching me. I am not very skilled, I must confess, but I do know that the dragon is stronger than the elephant. Arianne's direct challenges to the Golden Company aren't just clever one-liners for the sake of wit, but they're meant to highlight just how much more imposing Daenerys Targaryen is when compared to Aegon Targaryen. Unlike Aegon, Dany doesn't just carry a legendary name, she has dragons to back it up. But Lysona doesn't care. To him, Dany is half a world away and her dragons may as well be fairy tales. He believes in something more tangible. 10,000 sellswords and a Targaryen prince. Allegedly. In his eyes, that's all he thinks he needs. Prince Aegon is of your own blood, princess. Son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Ellie of Dorne, your father's sister. Daenerys Targaryen is of our blood as well. Daughter of King Aerys, Rhaegar's sister. And she has dragons. Or so the tales would have us believe. Fire and blood. Where is she? Half a world away at Slaver's Bay, said Lysona Mar. As for these purported dragons, I have not seen them. In Kivas it is true, the dragon is mightier than the elephant. But on the battlefield, give me elephants I can see and touch and send against my foes, not dragons made of words and wishes. And here's where George R. R. Martin leans into another one of his favorite motifs. The moment a character thinks the battle is won is often the moment they seal their own downfall. Lysona's blind confidence in the Golden Company, without even acknowledging Dany's very real dragons, borders on arrogance, and it is that hubris that could ultimately lead to the undoing of the Golden Company and of Aegon himself. But before Arianne can keep working through Lysona's flawed logic, her thoughts get a little cloudy, thanks to the more intoxicating idea of seeing this so-called sexy Aegon Targaryen in person. Sure, he may not have dragons, but the second Halden Halfmaester tells Arianne that Aegon has taken Storm's End? Ooh, suddenly Arianne's a little flustered. She doesn't seem to care so much. Taking Storm's End? That's pretty hot. And being the possible son of Arianne Martell? That's even hotter. Incest notwithstanding. All this has led myself and many others within the community to speculate that Arianne will indeed meet Aegon Targaryen in person, where then she will marry him, do the dirty with him, and form a renewed Martell and Targaryen alliance that will then work to take King's Landing right out from underneath Cersei Lannister and Tommen's nose. And when Daenerys hears of this so-called Aegon Targaryen sitting himself on the Iron Throne in King's Landing, oh, she may have some words for him. She may be spurred to finally make that trek west towards Westeros and confront this alleged Aegon about his potential Targaryen lineage. All of which has me hyped to find out what happens next, even in spite of these 14 plus years and counting of waiting. And that, my friends, is the Arianne II sample chapter. A chapter rife with interesting conversations and speculative possibilities despite the lack of a proper resolution. A chapter that I think is well worth reading despite my initial reservations. But what say you? Let me know what your thoughts are on this Arianne II sample chapter down in the comments section below. Thank you so very much for watching another one of my Winds of Winter sample chapter review videos. I really appreciate it so much. Stay tuned for more sample chapter videos within the coming weeks. But until then, The Advocate, out.